Hello, this is Paul Chek. Welcome back to my video blogs. Today I'd like to talk to you about primal pattern movement training. We are going to start today with the premise. I'll explain to you how I developed the primal pattern concept, and then we will go in part two into the neutral spine dynamics. I was recently listening to an interview where the people on the interview were talking about primal patterning and some of the concepts of people getting stuck in neutral. And so it kind of triggered me to inform people that may not be aware of what I actually developed in my primal pattern system and what are the importance of neutral spine dynamics, and when do you go outside of neutral spine dynamics within the primal pattern system or in training in general, and how do you do that safely and effectively, because there are oftentimes misconceptions about what I teach or what I believe or any number of things like that. And there's also the challenge that now the term primal pattern movement is so widely used, very few people realize that I'm actually the originator of the concept, but many people have copied my ideas, and now there's numerous personal training and exercise education programs all over the world that use the concept, but they haven't been trained by me, and so it's second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand plus news. And so I wanted to let you hear it from the horse's mouth. I developed the primal pattern system officially and put a trademark on the name in 1988, if I remember my first trademark on it. And the concept was developed through a variety of experiences. So what I'd like to do is just give you a brief overview of how the whole primal pattern concept came to be as an actual concept that you can now read books about, such as my book, Movement That Matters. That is a beautiful expose written for the general public on how primal pattern movements work, what they are, how to use them, how to break them down into simpler patterns, and other very important information for anyone that wants to be fit, whether it be a housewife or a construction worker or a mother, or whether you're an athlete or just about anybody, somebody even who's got health challenges or physical challenges that needs help finding direction with how to exercise their body. So I will begin by stating that my first question when I got into professional rehabilitation, which was I was in the Army, and I was the trainer of the United States Army boxing team, which I stayed on the Army boxing team as trainer from around the beginning of 1984 through October 86, when I left the Army and came to San Diego to enter the Sports Massage Training Institute, where I got my license as a sports massage therapist, and then continued my studies and got my license as a holistic health practitioner, which is a more comprehensive training, and then progressed my education from there. What happened was I had worked in the Army with an osteopathic physician who was the team doctor, learning how to take care of sports injuries, mostly acute injuries, in the gym. Our gym was the center for training at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, probably the biggest or very close to the biggest military post there is in the Army, where a lot of the Army athletes train. So I got exposed to all sorts of different types of injuries, but we had a 30-man full-time boxing team that was traveling the world competing both in civilian tournaments and military tournaments. So there was a lot of work to be done. My job was to take charge of their nutrition, design their exercise programs, and I implemented the first massage therapy program for the Army boxing team probably ever known of in the Army, from what I was told. So that work, as well as working with the team doctor, gave me a lot of opportunity to explore and use concepts that I had developed earlier in my athletic career by studying and working with fellow athletes and friends that had different approaches and from different sports. So by the time I left the Army, I had a fair bit of experience both with injury and with conditioning athletes, and had a lifetime of being an athlete. The sports at which I was most committed to and successful in were boxing. I spent a fair bit of time kickboxing as well, and motocross racing, but I played pretty much every sport I could get into when I was in elementary school and junior high school and high school, because that was my kind of release for my stressors, and I loved them all. So when it came time to, after I'd been in San Diego for a while, I worked for a chiropractor for almost 2 years who specialized in sports injuries, mostly working with endurance athletes. I then got offered to come to work for the largest physical therapy clinic in San Diego called Sports and Orthopedic Rehabilitation, where there was 22 physical therapists and athletic trainers, and we shared that space with 13 orthopedic surgeons and, if I remember right, a neurosurgeon. So it was a surgical center with its own physical therapy center built in, which allowed me to spend a lot of time going to surgeries. I've done 5 complete cadaver dissections and many partial dissections with the surgeons. So I got a good foundation of training. Now, one of the things that happened when I got into that professional rehabilitation environment, a job I got because the owner of the clinic had failed in rehabilitation after her 4th knee surgery, and I had rehabbed one of the athletic trainers that worked there, who was an elite runner. He suggested that the owner come see me for help. To make a long story short, I successfully rehabilitated that knee for her, and it blew her mind because the approaches I was using she'd never seen or heard of before, and she had a master's degree in physical therapist, and she ultimately asked me to come work for her clinic because she wanted to have access to those skills, and asked me if I would be willing to share those skills with the physical therapist. And I said, sure, as long as they're willing to share their skills with me. So I spent 4 years working in that clinic and learning from the therapist and sharing with them. Now, one of the things that happened right away when I started working there was that the doctors and the physical therapists became very, very nervous and insecure about the fact that I was doing what we would today call functional exercise with patients, even when they had things like herniated discs and other major injuries for which the medical system would put you on your back or on some sort of a machine and stay far away from those types of exercise. In fact, many doctors were telling patients with disc injuries that they should never squat, which I thought was quite interesting, because as I asked a physician one day, how do you get on and off a toilet? How do you get in and out of a chair? And how do you get in and out of a bed? And show me a single person that doesn't squat. I'd really love to see it, unless they're in a wheelchair. And I called the surgeon over to the window, and it just so happened I just finished working with one of his patients that had a back injury, and she was walking out to her car 2 floors down, and I said, there's your patient right there, now watch this. She went over and got into her, if I remember right, Nissan 280ZX, and I said, now watch what happens when she opens the door to the car. And she opened the door to the car, and she did a single-legged squat with a twist and got herself into that car. And I said, well, she's been driving that car from the beginning of the injury and right through your surgical work with her, and nobody said a thing to her. Yet the concept of telling people that they shouldn't do that is really disrespectful for the requirements of life. So I was working in that physical therapy department. I had quite a good friendship with the senior physical therapist, Chris Siegel, who was a very open-minded, highly intelligent woman. And she came to me and she said, Paul, the doctors and the therapists are all quite nervous because they keep watching you exercise these patients with with exercises and methods that they were taught were very, very dangerous, yet we cannot deny that you're getting very good results. So there's a fair bit of confusion here, and we know that you rehabbed our boss and that we failed at that, so we would really love it if you could put together a presentation for us on how it is that you choose which exercises you use in each different case. Now, that was the first time I was asked to give an academic presentation of my methodology. But remember, I grew up on a farm working all the time and playing a lot of sports. But what I haven't mentioned is that one of my hobbies was studying developmental man. I was very excited when I met my first wife because she has a degree in biological anthropology from Cambridge University. So I was able to discuss many of my theories with her and get good feedback from someone who actually had solid training in that area. So what I did is I began to do a retrospective analysis. I listed every exercise I could think of. I had all sorts of pen boards and blackboards, and I just wrote down every exercise I knew of or used or could even find in books. And I began the process with one question: what common denominators exist amongst all of these exercises? So I had, potentially hundreds of exercises up, and I kept having to whittle them down. So I would say, for example, okay, if you take a squat pattern, the following exercises all use a squat pattern. So I would then use a color to code them, and I would say all those exercises above the squat, such as a jump shot in basketball, are dependent upon the squat movement. So by a process of reduction, I was able to narrow down 7 movement patterns upon which all the other movement patterns were dependent upon for their existence. And as I show in my book, Movement That Matters, we also have many multi-pattern movements. For example, if you throw a ball, as I show in the book, you begin with a lunge, which is coupled with a twist, and the push pattern is what is the final phase of acceleration for throwing a ball. So you have a lunge, twist, push pattern. And if you have any dysfunction in the lunge pattern, it will manifest as some compensation in the twist or the push pattern, as well as the lunge pattern itself. There has to be some kind of a compensation in there. So I was able to then show how the patterns were codependent upon each other and how each of them had to be authentic, because any pattern dysfunction would mirror itself in the other patterns and create a motor pattern in the nervous system that perpetually produced some kind of a movement disorder. I was able to show in rehabilitation that a huge amount of shoulder injuries in throwing athletes, whether they be javelin throwers or baseball players, I rehab professional pitchers in my career, many of them had dysfunctions in their lunge pattern, and all of them had dysfunctions in core function, and their twist pattern were not working correctly, so they overused their shoulder to compensate. And I give a nice case of that in the book. So once I figured this all out, I went and met with a physical therapist, and then I showed them the Primal Pattern system. Now, when I was in professional rehabilitation, one of the first questions that I asked when I walked into this beautiful, very exotic, very expensive clinic, which was covered with expensive machines, and I rarely ever saw any of the physical therapists using anything but machines. In fact, my first introduction to the Swiss ball was in 1988, and I saw a dusty big ball sitting in the corner and asked my boss, "What is that thing over there?" And she said, "That's a Swiss ball." I said, "What's it for?" She said, "Neurological rehabilitation." She said, I said, "Why doesn't anybody use it?" She said, "Most of us don't really know what to do with it." So that became another investigation that led to my whole process of developing, which became the first educational programs in the world for integrating Swiss balls into a legitimate strength and conditioning program, prior to which it was just used in aerobic exercise and pretty much not used otherwise, except for kids playing, which is a good idea. So I looked at all these machines and thought, my God, why are they using all these machines? And then based on the science of motor learning, which I had studied and continued to study, I could explain that a lot of the things that were happening on machines didn't play out functionally. For example, I saw all sorts of studies put out by Arthur Jones and the Medex Corporation showing how many of these people that they put through their rehab program had gained even 300% in back strength. But then when tested functionally, you could find that these people did not have any functional strength. You might wonder how I did that. Well, right next door to my physical therapy clinic a few years later that I owned was the the University of California, San Diego Medical Center's Orthopedic Rehabilitation Center, which was run by a famous back physician, Vert Mooney, who was doing pilot studies for the MedX equipment people. And whenever they had patients that were not responding to their therapists in the MedX program, they referred them to me, and I rehabilitated them. And they kept asking me, how did you do that? And I would tell them, here's what's happening. And they were always so confused as to why these people got such great improvements of strength, but then kept hurting themselves doing simple things like getting on and off a toilet. So I explained to them how the science of motor learning works and how you cannot transfer strength from an environment where you do not have to activate your core, your balance centers, and integrate what are called biomotor abilities, which means life motor. It's a concept developed by or shared by Tudor Bompa. It's common in Russian athletics and Russian exercise science, but in his book Theory and Methodology of Strength Training, you can read about biomotor abilities, which are strength, power, speed, flexibility, agility, coordination, and endurance. So when I looked at the relationship of biomotor abilities, and I looked at what was going on in machine training, I could see that, for example, no matter how strong your abs got or your back got on a machine, one, if you're on the machine, you're shutting your core stabilizers and your postural system down because the body operates on the principle of maximum efficiency, or the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand. So the body won't turn on postural and stabilizer muscles. It doesn't have to, because it operates on a conservation of energy principle. It doesn't want to turn on something it doesn't need to turn on. So what I showed them is that they were learning a mode of using their body that was only applicable in the environment that they learned it. In other words, you might be strong on a back extension bench, and you're only strong when you're on that back extension bench or in an environment that's very close to it. But once you get up and have to pick up a box or a child, your brain cannot give you more strength in any region of the body that can stabilize and effectively integrate with the rest of the body. That was the big problem. So once I broke all the movements down and synthesized them down, I came up with 7 key movements. And those movements were squatting, lunging, bending, pushing, pulling, and twisting. I just say them that way because they roll off the tongue easier. Squat, lunge, bend, push, pull, twist. So there's 7 primal patterns. Now, years later, in about, I'm guessing around 2000, 2001 or something like that, I went to the Czech Republic with a couple of my instructors that worked for me at the time, and did an advanced training program in rehabilitation with Carol Levitt, who wrote the book Manipulative Therapy and the Rehabilitation of the Locomotor System, is very famous for his work in orthopedic rehabilitation and neurological issues. And I also studied with Vladimir Yonda, who I had studied with for a number of years, taking his courses, and is also a famous expert, both of which are, I believe, dead now. And in that program, we got exposed to the work of Dr. Vojta, who had developed a very comprehensive system of infant development. And the demonstrations that I saw with people blew my mind. So that triggered my interest in infant development. I began exploring it with my patients, read a mountain of books on it, and then took my knowledge and did what I always do, synthesized it, integrated it, practiced it, and built a system out of my knowledge of infant development that I now teach in the Chek practitioner program at level 1 and in HLC 3 because of its importance for identifying movement deficits. And the key point I wanted to bring out here is I did this analysis that I told you about, but when I began to study infant development, I had kind of a magical moment where I looked at the patterns that are involved in the growth and development of an infant, which I have outlined here, which I teach in Chek practitioner level 1. In utero, we are getting a lot of activity which allows us to twist our spine as a neonate because the spine is still cartilaginous. So in the womb of the mother, you're floating, you don't have the compressive forces of gravity that you do once you come out of the womb, and the rotation is the most complex movement for the spine to orchestrate. and it is potentially the most dangerous for an undeveloped spine or a spine who does not have an integrated muscular system to support it yet. So we begin in utero, in that protected environment, developing our rotational movement skills and awarenesses and programming the nervous system for that, which continues progressively as we go through the cycle. Then around 3 months, we begin pushing, which is the beginning of developing spinal curvatures. We first pick our head up, which develops a cervical curve, then we push up, which begins to develop a lumbar curve, and then as we begin to crawl, we start pulling ourselves forward, and then we develop a thoracic curvature, and then we have the bend pattern. So they go in utero twist, about 3 months, we're working on pushing, then 3 to 5 months we're integrating pulling movements, then we're going 5 to 8 months with bending, 7 to 11 months we start to squat and lunge, which is opening the gateway for the development of what is technically called gait, but you and I would recognize with the word walking. So that occurs somewhere between the 7th month and the 12th month. These are not fixed numbers, they're very dynamic in kids. So I thought it was quite an amazing experience, because my observation by looking at the studies of human beings, and I was asking myself as a young man, what were the selective pressures of nature? As I was looking at anatomy books, I thought, what is it that made us have certain muscles, like the biceps, that have more of a tonic tendency or capacity for more work, or tonic muscles generally have more of a role in stabilizing joints and providing posture, and then phasic muscles, for example, like your hamstrings, your quads, and your butt muscles, are predominantly more fast twitch and are better for short-term or more explosive activities. So I thought, what is it about our bodies? Because our bodies obviously had to be designed to suit nature, or they wouldn't work very well. So when I looked at the selective pressures of nature and asked myself the question, as part of my analysis that I did with all the exercises, what would you have to do in nature to survive? Not only did I come to those 7 movement patterns, but I could not exclude twisting, pushing, pulling, bending, squatting, lunging, walking, which has other derivations called jogging and sprinting, or running fast. If you look at the motor learning literature, there's those separate neurological derivations. Would you be able to survive in nature if you couldn't walk, twist, push, pull, bend, squat, or lunge? The answer is no. You simply could not. And I grew up on a farm in a pretty wild environment. I was a hunter, went out with my friends as kids hunting, spent time in the woods, hiking and living in the woods, so I was very familiar with what it's like to be out there. And I realized, very interestingly, not only were those the patterns we had to survive in nature, but they were the patterns that were the common denominators of which all other exercises come from. And then I found out those were the exact patterns that an infant goes through. So here you see, shall we say, the universe giving me feedback to say you're moving in the right direction. So now, before I forget, there are other patterns of movement that I call secondary or accessory patterns that are not specific to primal patterns, but those are not things we would do in nature. For example, it's not natural to be in a wheelchair in nature. So being in a wheelchair, you're going to be ambulating in a way that is unnatural to nature. In my course, I show, for example, that if you're working for the electrical company and you're a lineman, you may be way up high in what they call a cherry picker, one of those big baskets, leaning against the basket and doing movements that do not require the normal integrated function of the rest of the body or in a normal primal pattern sequence. You could be a figure skating doing a triple jump with a spin. Well, nowhere in nature is that required of you, so that would be a secondary pattern, and then an accessory pattern are more technical things that are covered in my courses. But the reality of it is we also have other patterns that we've created for various environments, such as being a race car driver, and many other environments, so that we always have to be aware of what is the client's specific dream Now, what I found out is that the first thing we have to do in rehabilitation is we've got to get people to what I call primal pattern standard, which means to be efficient at the use of performing squat, lunge, bend, push, pulls, and twists with your own body weight. How efficient depends on the environment you're in. If you're a mother with 6 kids, you need to be fairly efficient. But if you're just somebody that lives at home, sits and works on a computer all day, then you need to just be efficient enough to navigate the environment that you're in. If you're a park ranger and you have to climb mountains all day and deal with injured people, then you're going to need to be more significantly efficient. And that becomes the basis by which we move people forward with things like resistance training. Now, you can also take those primal patterns and break them down and do rehabilitation on the individual using things like Swiss balls and other techniques, which I teach in my courses as well. So really, where we're at then is I've given you an overview of the primal patterns being the essential patterns we need to survive in nature. Primal patterns being the patterns which have a catalyst or a common denominator function to almost every other movement that we do standing on our own 2 feet in a functional environment. And primal patterns actually being directly related to the very patterns of movement the infant has to learn in order to navigate life effectively. What I would like to do is say that if you want to learn more about these things in nice simplistic language, in my book, which is, it's a beautiful little book, Movement That Matters, really gets you started. We have the Chek Foundations program, which gives you a whole bunch of benefits, access to correspondence courses, articles, all sorts of stuff that could give you a lot of information that would not only inspire you, educate you, and give you a lot of tools you can use to heal yourself, improve your athletic performance, or make more money if you're in the exercise or rehabilitation profession, but get you ready for the more advanced training, starting with Chek Exercise Coach to CP1, CP2, CP3, and finally CP4. Now, other areas, my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, shows you how to develop these basic patterns, and it gives you a questionnaire that shows you how much stress you're under and suggests what level of stress with an exercise program would be therapeutic for you. And I give you a little exercise library. So if you're looking for ways to begin exploring the primal pattern system, you can look at my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, and it even shows you how to do work-in exercises so you get autonomic balance and aren't just bleeding all your energy out for superficial aesthetic development, but you're working on your insides as well. Chek Practitioner Level 1 takes you into a much deeper level of training where you learn, in Exercise Coach, you learn how to do those patterns properly. In Chek Level 1, you learn how to assess those movement patterns with the knowledge of all the organs, all the glands, and all the chakra correlations, so you can use movement as an assessment of the body and the mind, not just the physical exercise, and work with that person holistically. For example, by watching the way a person moves, you could identify that their abdominal wall's not working right, which you might then investigate and find out it's due to inflammation in the small intestine, which you find is due to a gluten intolerance or something like that, and then you make the correction there, and you realize very quickly, once that gut heals, that the movement pattern you were assessing completely changes, which means that it wasn't that the person's brain didn't know how to do the movement, it's that the body couldn't execute the movement because of inhibitory influences in the nervous system designed specifically to protect the glands and the organs from being depleted by muscles on the same channels. In other words, if it's a choice between lunging and digesting, your body will shut the lunge pattern down and even allow you to get injured to protect the organs and help them heal. And then the Chek Foundation program I've just described. If you go to the home page on the Chek Institute and just scroll down, you will see something mentioning the Chek Foundations program, which I think is a fantastic concept and a fantastic idea that's a very, very good investment financially. Now, in our next presentation, we will look at neutral spine dynamics, and I'll talk to you about some things that are very, very confusing for most people out there, misunderstood, and I'm often misunderstood, but unfortunately I'm not so much misunderstood by the students that actually do the higher level training. I'm misunderstood by the people that they talk to or the people that read my articles but don't actually directly access me and make judgments in their head without actually knowing enough about the truth of what I'm talking about to make a solid, coherent decision or judgment about what I'm teaching. So because some of these things are so critical, I will be more than excited to share some of the science and principles that I use in order to progress people safely so they achieve their dreams each and every day. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Paul Chek. I'll look forward to our next visit.